The snow fell in long silver veils, drifting from a sky that seemed to press down upon the earth. Lantern light quivered on the cliff's edge, where men's boots scraped against frozen stone. Sheriff Clayton Harlow's voice was steady and cold, the words slicing sharper than the wind. "You'll do as you're told, girl," he said, his gloved hand clamping tight around Amara Lee's arm. She was scarcely 18, her frame slight against the bulk of his 40 years, but her eyes carried a brightness that even the snow could not smother. That brightness, her refusal, was the very thing he meant to extinguish. She had said no. A single word, spoken not in defiance but in trembling honesty, had been enough to rouse his rage. No, she would not marry him. No, she would not bind her life to his badge, his iron, his shadow. In the town below, whispers had already gathered like smoke, some calling her foolish, some calling her proud. But here, on the cliff where the world narrowed to snow and stone, only his pride remained, wounded and vengeful. The men who had followed him from town shifted uneasily, their breath clouding in the frigid dark. None dared intervene. The sheriff's word was law, and the law, tonight, demanded punishment. Amara's boots slipped as he pushed her closer to the edge. She could smell the iron tang of his coat, the stale whiskey on his breath, the faint crackle of lantern oil sputtering behind them. Her heart pounded not for herself alone, but for the cruel certainty that no one would stop him. "I'd rather die," she whispered, her voice nearly stolen by the storm. Harlow's jaw tightened. "Then so be it." The shove was not violent, but it was final. Her body pitched forward into emptiness, arms flailing at air too thin to hold her. The world became a tumble of white and black, the night sky and the rushing snow, the frozen earth rising to meet her. Pain bloomed sharp in her shoulder as she struck a jutting stone, then again in her ribs, a crack echoing louder than the wind. At last she landed in a hollow drift, snow muffling the sound of her collapse. Silence swallowed her. Above, the sheriff's lantern dwindled to a dim star against the cliff rim. For a moment, she thought she was dead. Her eyes closed, and all she could hear was the faint beat of her own blood, fading like the last note of a song. Memories surfaced. Her mother's worn hands mending a dress, the way townsfolk looked at her with pity, or worse, disdain. "Pretty enough to catch a man," Ruthie May had whispered once at the boarding house, "but too poor to keep one." The weight of shame had always pressed on her, though she had carried it quietly. Now it seemed to drag her deeper into the snow, urging her to let go, to surrender to the cold. But breath came ragged and stubborn. She coughed, a fleck of red staining the whiteness before her. The world had not yet finished with her. She lay still, listening to the storm, her body battered, her spirit trembling between despair and a faint, unyielding thread of life. Above, the sheriff lingered only a moment more. One of the men muttered, "She might yet live." "She won't," Harlow replied, and his voice carried the finality of a man who believed his own lie. Then their footsteps faded, swallowed by wind and snow, leaving her alone in the hollow. Time passed strangely in the cold. Each heartbeat was a thunderclap in her ears, each breath a fight against the frost seeping into her lungs. She tried to move, but pain answered, sharp and merciless. Her arms curled around her chest, as if to shield the brokenness within. She thought of the town again, of the eyes that would not mourn her, only gossip. They would call it misfortune, or perhaps scandal. A girl too proud to bow, too foolish to survive. Yet somewhere beneath the ache, a spark remained. Not pride, not defiance, but the faint, unyielding wish to see another dawn. She fixed her gaze on the snow above, flakes swirling like ghostly dancers, and told herself she would not die here. Not in silence. Not in shame. The wind shifted, carrying with it a sound, distant at first, then nearer. A rhythm not made by storm or stone, but by steps. Heavy, deliberate, breaking the crust of snow. Her heart faltered, uncertain if salvation or doom approached. She tried to lift her head, but darkness tugged at her vision. Through the blur she saw a shadow against the storm. Tall, broad-shouldered, hair unbound and black as raven's wing. He moved with the certainty of one who belonged to the wilderness, not the town. Bare skin gleamed bronze where snowflakes melted on his chest, the rest draped in fur. He paused at the edge of the drift, looking down at her with eyes unreadable, as if the storm itself had carried him into being. Fear flickered in her. The warnings whispered all her life about Comanche raiders, savages who stole and burned. Yet his gaze held none of the sheriff's hunger, none of the townsfolk's disdain. It was steady, grave, almost sorrowful, as though he had seen this kind of cruelty before and carried the weight of it in silence. Her lips parted, a wordless plea escaping in the faint cloud of her breath. He crouched, the snow creaking beneath his weight, and reached for her. His hands were large, calloused, yet careful as they slid beneath her shoulders, lifting her as though she were something precious, not discarded. Pain flared, but she did not resist. The world swayed as he carried her, his warmth seeping through the bitter cold. She caught the faint scent of smoke and pine clinging to him, so unlike the iron and whiskey of Harlow. Her head rested against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, strong and calm. For the first time that night, she felt less like a broken thing, and more like a soul worth holding. The storm thickened, but he moved through it with ease, each step certain, carrying her away from the cliff, from the place of her shame. Snowflakes tangled in his hair, glistening like fragments of stars. Her vision wavered, the edges dimming, yet before darkness claimed her fully, she heard his voice, low, quiet, spoken as if only for her. "Don't be afraid," he said. "I came for you." And with those words the night seemed to shift, the storm itself bending around them, leaving her suspended between fear and a fragile, bewildering hope. The wind screamed through the trees as though the whole wilderness bore witness to her humiliation. But his steps were steady, unhurried, the rhythm of a man who belonged to storm and silence alike. Amara drifted in and out of awareness against his chest, her cheek-brushing skin warmed by blood and motion, not by fire. She felt the rise and fall of his breath, slow and deliberate, as though the blizzard itself bent to his will. Her body, racked with pain, could not resist him. She had no strength to protest, only the faint memory of fear, dulled now by exhaustion. Through blurred eyes she glimpsed the world swaying. Dark trunks of pines, snow-laden boughs bending low, the fleeting shimmer of frozen water. Lantern light was far behind now. The sheriff and his men had not followed. The man who carried her never glanced back. His gaze was fixed forward, searching, determined. He walked as if he had always known where to go. A hollow cut into the hillside revealed itself at last, a narrow cave sheltered by overhanging rock, snow curling like smoke at its mouth. He ducked inside, the storm muffled in an instant, and lowered her carefully onto a spread of hides. The air smelled of earth and pine resin, of smoke long extinguished. For the first time since she had fallen, she was not exposed to the sky's cruelty. He crouched beside her, his eyes studying her wounds with a depth that made her chest tighten. His hands moved with an unexpected gentleness, pulling free strips of cloth, pressing them against her shoulder where the stone had torn skin. She flinched, but he said nothing, his silence neither cruel nor indifferent. It was the silence of someone who understood that words could wound deeper than injuries. Amara's breath hitched, her mind tangling between what she had been taught and what she now saw. The town had painted men like him as shadows, raiders, takers, merciless as the storm itself. Yet this man, bare-chested under furs, moved as if every gesture was weighed, measured, careful not to break what was already fragile. Her lips trembled. "Why?" The single word slipped out, fragile as glass. His dark eyes lifted to hers. He did not answer, not with words. Instead, he adjusted the fur beneath her, tucking it closer to her ribs where the cold gnawed most sharply. The answer lay in the action itself, unspoken but undeniable. She wanted to close her eyes and surrender, but shame burned hotter than her wounds. She remembered Ruthie Mae's voice, thin as a knife. "A girl like you is bound to stumble. Men only give so many chances." And the sheriff's hand, gripping, claiming, punishing. A life measured not by her own worth, but by the judgment of others. Now here she lay in a stranger's shelter, her fate once more bound to the hands of a man she did not know. He rose and moved to the mouth of the cave, crouching where the snow drifted inside. With a flint and tinder, he coaxed a small flame to life, feeding it with dry splinters until a fire breathed warmth into the chamber. The glow painted his face in bronze and shadow, his scars etched in lines that spoke of battles survived, of burdens carried in silence. She watched him, curiosity mingling with fear. When he turned back to her, the fire at his back, he seemed larger than before, an unshaken figure carved against the storm's howl. He carried no badge, no town's authority, yet in that moment he seemed more steadfast than all of them. Her voice rasped again, softer this time. "Who are you?" He met her gaze, and at last he spoke, his words low and steady, accented by rhythms of a tongue older than the town. "Talon." The name lingered in the air like smoke, strong and unyielding. Amara swallowed, her throat raw. "Why help me?" He considered her, the firelight flickering in his eyes. Then he said simply, "Because no one else would." The words struck her harder than any stone. They carried no pity, no demand, only truth. She turned her face away, ashamed of the tears that pricked her eyes. All her life she had longed for someone to see her without judgment, to offer kindness not as a bargain but as a gift. Now that it was given, she did not know how to receive it. The flames crackled. Outside, the storm roared, but within the cave, time seemed slowed, suspended. Talon busied himself with tending her wounds, rewrapping the bandages when they soaked through, adjusting the furs to shield her from drafts. She noted the scars on his arms, marks of violence endured, yet his hands were steady, his touch measured, as though he had sworn never to pass pain forward. When he leaned close to tie a strip of cloth at her shoulder, she dared to whisper, "I don't want to die." His gaze held hers, unwavering. "Then you won't." The certainty in his voice startled her. It was not arrogance, nor blind hope, but conviction. She believed him in spite of herself. Hours passed in fragments. She dozed, waking to find him feeding the fire, his profile outlined against the glow. She watched him in silence, each moment etching deeper into her memory. A man who had found her at the edge of death, and, without asking, chosen to bear her weight. A man who had said little, yet in silence spoken more than most dared. But fear was a stubborn shadow. Questions gnawed at her. Would he keep her here? Would he expect payment she could not give? Was he, in the end, different from Harlow, only slower to reveal it? The town's whispers clawed at her, trying to stitch doubt into every act of kindness. When she stirred, he noticed. He leaned toward her, his voice low. "Rest. Tomorrow you walk." The words caught her breath. Walk? She doubted she could stand. Yet there was no mockery in his tone, no cruelty, only expectation. He believed she could, and somehow that belief pressed against her weakness more powerfully than pity. Snow drifted into the mouth of the cave, catching in the firelight like falling embers. Amara's eyes grew heavy, her body surrendering to exhaustion. Before sleep claimed her fully, she felt the weight of a fur being drawn higher over her, his hand lingering only long enough to be sure she was covered. A gesture, nothing more, yet it warmed her more deeply than the fire. Her final thought before surrendering to dreams was not of the sheriff's cruelty, nor of the town's scorn. It was of this stranger, Talon, and the bewildering truth that sometimes the hand extended from the shadows was gentler than all the hands that had claimed to protect her. The storm outside howled louder, as if railing against what had been set in motion. And deep within the cave, firelight flickering against stone, she felt the stirring of a question that would not let her go. What new peril awaited when the sheriff learned she had lived? Snow clung to the world like a shroud as dawn crept pale and bruised over the ridges. Amara stirred against the firs, her body sore but less fragile than the night before. Pain laced every breath, yet she drew it anyway, proof that she still lived. Talon crouched near the embers, feeding them small branches, his broad shoulders still bare beneath a drape of fur. He looked carved from the wilderness itself, unshaken by cold, his movements slow, deliberate, as though he carried no urgency except the fire's steady breathing. She tried to rise and faltered, her arm giving way. He glanced at her but did not move to help, only watched, waiting to see if she would try again. Shame colored her cheeks. In town she had been measured by obedience, by how quickly she bent to others. Here, she found herself measured by something unfamiliar, her will. She set her jaw, pressed her hand to the stone wall, and forced herself upright. Pain rippled through her ribs, but she managed to sit. When she met his eyes, a flicker of respect glimmered there, subtle as smoke. Outside the cave, the storm had softened to a sullen hush. Talon rose, gathered his bow, and stepped into the whiteness, motioning for her to follow. She balked at first, trembling at the thought of walking, but he did not return to lift her. Instead, he waited, the snow drifting around him. She understood the silent challenge. If she wished to live, she must move. With effort, she pulled herself to her feet. The furs he had wrapped around her fell heavy against her shoulders, warm yet foreign, carrying the scent of pine and smoke. They walked in silence through drifts that swallowed her boots. Every step was agony, but Talon's presence steadied her. He walked a pace ahead, turning back only when her steps faltered. The wilderness pressed close, pines heavy with snow, streams frozen in mid-song, the air so sharp it cut her lungs. It was unlike the town, where every glance pierced with judgment, where voices always whispered. Here, there was only the crunch of snow, the beat of her heart, and the steady rhythm of his stride. Yet the town followed her in memory. She heard Ruthie Mae's voice as clear as if the woman walked beside her. A girl without kin is like a horse without reins, bound to wander into trouble. She remembered Jed Pike's weary eyes when he sold her thread at the store, pity tucked in his wrinkles. They had seen her as fragile, incomplete, a girl who must be claimed or discarded. And Sheriff Harlow had chosen the latter. The ache of that rejection gnawed at her more than the pain in her ribs. She pressed a hand to her chest, as though she could smother the shame still clinging to her. Talon noticed, his gaze briefly resting on her hand, but again he said nothing. Words, she realized, were not his way. Instead he paused, reached back, and pulled the fur tighter around her shoulders. A gesture, simple yet profound. She did not know why it made her throat burn with unshed tears. By midday, they reached a ridge where the world opened wide. From the height, she saw the town far below, smoke curling from chimneys, small and fragile against the sweep of snow. For a moment her knees weakened, fear flooding back. The sheriff was there, his badge gleaming, his voice louder than all others. She imagined him learning she had lived, his fury spreading like fire through tinder. As if echoing her thought, Talon's voice came low. "He will come." She looked at him sharply, startled by his certainty. "Why?" "Pride," he said simply. "A man like that cannot let go what he thinks he owns." His words struck her with cold truth. Sheriff Harlow would not let her slip away. To him, her defiance had been an insult that demanded blood. She wrapped the fur tighter, as though it might shield her from more than just the wind. They descended from the ridge, and as the shadows lengthened, Talon led her to another hollow where they might rest. He built the fire with practiced hands and she watched, feeling the strange comfort of his presence grow stronger, though still wrapped in mystery. When he settled opposite her, his face lined with firelight, she dared to ask, "Why did you come that night? How did you know?" He studied the flames before answering. "I heard them. Men who believe themselves strong shout loud enough for the mountains to carry their shame." She imagined the sheriff's voice echoing into the wilderness, arrogant and cruel, and this man, this stranger, hearing it. The thought left her silent, humbled. She had fallen thinking no one cared, yet someone had. Still, the doubts pressed. "The town will say I ran with you. That I chose." Her voice trailed off, tangled in shame and fear. His gaze lifted, steady, piercing. "Do their words bind you?" The question stunned her. She had lived her life as though they did, every whisper, every glance shaping her worth. Could it be otherwise? She had no answer. Silence stretched, filled only by the fire's crackle. Then he reached to his side, pulled free a strip of cured hide, and extended it to her. She hesitated, but he pressed it gently into her palm. "For your hands," he said. "So the cold does not take them." Her fingers curled around the gift, warmth seeping not from the hide, but from the gesture itself. She realized he did not see her as weak or as property, but as someone who must be preserved. Not pitted, protected. The difference pierced her like a blade, cutting through years of shame. Night deepened. She lay near the fire, her body aching but her spirit shifting. Each act of his, silent, steady, unadorned, rebuilt something she thought forever lost. Dignity. Worth. A sense that her existence was not a burden. She wanted to thank him, but the words caught in her throat, unshaped. Outside, a wolf howled, low and mournful. She shivered, and Talon rose, moving to the cave mouth. His silhouette loomed against the snowlight, still and vigilant. She realized then that he would not sleep, not while danger lingered. Her eyes closed, but her mind would not rest. She saw again the sheriff's face, red with fury, and knew Talon spoke truth. He would come. And when he did, the fragile sanctuary they had built would be tested. As sleep threatened to claim her, she whispered into the darkness, not certain if he heard. "I don't want to go back." For a moment, no reply came. Then his voice, quiet but certain, broke the silence. "Then you won't." The words settled over her like a vow. She drifted into uneasy dreams, the storm outside softening, yet in her chest another storm began to gather. The knowledge that the sheriff would not rest until he had reclaimed what he believed was his. The sky sagged low with heavy clouds, swollen with snow yet to fall. The forest lay hushed, its branches bowed under white, its silence sharp enough to cut. Amara walked close behind Talon, her breath misting in the cold, each step sinking deep into the drifts. Pain gnawed at her ribs, but she pressed forward, steadied by the certainty of his stride. Somewhere behind them, beyond the ridges and frozen creeks, she could feel the sheriff's presence pressing closer, like a sickness creeping through her veins. Talon halted suddenly, lifting his hand. Amara froze, her heart racing. From the hush of the trees came a sound. The faint creak of leather, the crunch of boots that did not belong to wolves or deer. Her stomach tightened. The sheriff had found their trail. They ducked into the shadow of a pine grove. Talon crouched, eyes narrowing, body still as stone. Amara watched him, struck again by how the storm seemed to bend around his silence, as though he were part of the land itself. He reached for his bow, string taut with quiet menace, then gestured for her to stay behind the trunk. She obeyed, though her knees shook. The first voice broke through the stillness, rough and familiar. "She's here somewhere. Spread out." Sheriff Harlow's tone was iron-dipped in fury, loud enough to shake snow from the branches. Amara clenched her fists, nails biting her palms. His voice had once dictated her world, the final word on her worth. Now, hearing it in the wilderness, she felt it clash against the new silence Talon had given her. The men moved like shadows between the trees, rifles slung, faces hard beneath brims. There were 5 of them besides Harlow, their breath rising in white clouds. Talon did not flinch. He waited, patient, his bowstring quivering with the stillness of a predator poised. Amara's breath caught when one of the men drew near, his lantern beams spilling over the snow. She pressed her back to the tree, her heart slamming so hard she thought it might give her away. The man took another step, and then an arrow hissed through the air, striking the snow at his boots. He stumbled back, cursing, his lantern swinging wildly. "Come out, savage!" Another shouted, firing blindly into the trees. Bark exploded near Amara's head, showering her with splinters. She stifled a cry. Talon moved then, swift as wind. He loosed another arrow, this one finding its mark, and a man crumpled into the snow with a strangled gasp. Chaos broke loose. Gunfire cracked, echoing through the valley, while Talon wove between trunks, his figure a blur of fur and muscle. His movements carried no frenzy. Each strike, each step was measured, as though he danced with the storm itself. He dropped another man with a blade, silent and final, before vanishing into shadow. Amara crouched low, every instinct screaming to run, yet something deeper held her rooted. She had lived her life bending under fear, under others' judgments. But now, watching him fight for her, something in her refused to flee. Instead she rose from her cover, clutching the fur tighter around her shoulders, and for the first time did not shrink when Harlow's gaze fell on her. "There you are," he spat, stepping into the clearing. His badge glinted, his revolver steady in his hand. "You think you can defy me, girl? Think some heathen will save you?" The words stabbed like old wounds, reopening shame she thought buried. But she lifted her chin. Behind her, she heard Talon's steps, the crunch of snow deliberate. Harlow's eyes flicked past her, narrowing. "You come out now," Harlow barked, raising his pistol toward Talon. "Or I'll drag her back myself." Talon stepped into view, calm, unarmed but for the knife at his side. Snowflakes tangled in his hair, his breath steady despite the violence simmering in the air. He stopped a few paces from Amara, placing himself squarely between her and the sheriff. Harlow sneered. "You think she belongs to you now? She's mine. Always was." The word belongs twisted in Amara's chest, sparking something raw. She had been treated as property, as a prize, as a burden, but never as her own. Talon's stillness beside her was its own declaration. He did not claim her with words, only with the space he gave her to stand. Her voice trembled, but it rose clear. "I am not yours." The sheriff's face purpled with rage. "Ungrateful little!" His pistol swung toward her. The moment stretched, brittle as ice. Before the shot could sound, Talon lunged. The world fractured into motion. Snow spraying, a snarl torn from Harlow's throat, Amara's cry caught in the wind. They collided hard, the revolver firing into the air. Talon's knife flashed, not to kill but to disarm, steel biting into the sheriff's wrist. The gun clattered to the snow. The remaining men faltered, their courage wavering. Two fled into the trees, their lanterns bobbing like dying stars. Only one remained, trembling with his rifle half-raised, before dropping it and running after the others. Now there were only three: Amara, Talon, and the sheriff sprawled in the snow, his breath ragged, blood staining the drift from his cut wrist. His eyes burned with hatred, not pain. "You'll regret this," he rasped. "The town won't stand with you. They'll brand you both." Amara's chest heaved. Fear clawed at her, but beneath it rose a strange clarity. The town had branded her long before this, whispered her worth into nothing, judged her into silence. And still she lived. Still she stood. Talon looked down at Harlow, then back to her. He waited, letting her see that the choice was hers. For the first time, her fate was not forced upon her. It was hers to claim. She stepped forward, her voice shaking but strong. "I will not go back." The sheriff's laugh was bitter, broken. "You've made yourself an outcast." Her eyes stung, but she did not look away. Better an outcast than a prisoner. Silence fell, the storm pausing as though to listen. Harlow glared, humiliated, yet powerless. Talon's shadow loomed above him, steady, resolute. Slowly, the sheriff crawled backward, clutching his wrist, retreating into the trees with curses scattering like crows. Amara's knees trembled. She sagged against Talon's arm, not in weakness but in recognition of what had just been won. He steadied her with the same quiet strength he had carried since the first moment, his warmth anchoring her against the vast, frozen dark. Above them, the sky cracked open, flakes tumbling anew, covering blood and footprints alike. The forest returned to silence, as if swallowing the violence whole. Yet Amara knew this was no ending. The sheriff would not stop. His pride had been cut deeper than flesh. His hatred would fester, and it would follow them. She leaned into Talon, her voice barely more than breath. "He'll come again." Talon's gaze fixed on the horizon, dark and certain. "Then we'll be ready." The words lingered, heavy with promise, and in their weight Amara felt the first stirrings of something fiercer than fear, an ember of defiance, glowing steady against the snow. The dawn came pale and brittle, light spilling over the ridges like a blessing too thin to warm the bones. Amara woke with her cheek pressed to the fur that covered her, the fire long burned down to embers. Her body ached from the struggle of the night before, but her heart ached more from the truth she could no longer deny. She could not return to the town. Not to Ruthie Mae's whispers, not to Jed Pike's weary pity, and never to Sheriff Harlow's grasping hands. The wilderness had become her exile, but also, strangely, her refuge. Talon crouched near the cave's mouth, watching the horizon. Snow fell lightly, drifting in veils across the valley. His profile was sharp against the pale glow, scars catching the light like old script written on his skin. He had said little after the sheriff fled, but she had felt the weight of his silence. It was not avoidance but choice, as though words might break what had been formed between them in fire and snow. When she tried to sit, pain drew a gasp from her, and he turned immediately. His eyes held hers, steady, questioning without speech. She nodded once, gathering strength, and pushed herself upright. He watched until she settled, then looked away again, granting her the dignity of her effort. It was a gift more precious than pity. The day passed in slow steps. They walked through drifts deeper than her knees, Talon breaking the trail before her. Each time she faltered, he offered his hand. Not pulling, not dragging, only holding steady until she moved again. In that rhythm, she felt herself changing. No longer the discarded girl thrown from a cliff, no longer the whispered scandal of a town, but someone who could place one foot before the other and claim her own path. By afternoon, smoke rose faintly from the horizon. Amara froze, her breath catching. The sheriff had returned. His pride would not allow retreat. She looked at Talon, fear pressing tight against her chest. He studied the distant plume, his jaw set, then turned to her. "You must choose," he said softly. The words shook her. All her life, choices had been made for her. What she wore, where she lived, whom she might marry. Even her fall from the cliff had not been her decision. Now he gave her one, simple and profound. To hide or to stand. To yield to shame or to rise beyond it. Her voice trembled, but it carried. "I will not run." His eyes softened with something like respect. He nodded once, and together they prepared. He strung his bow, checked his knife, while she gathered wood and coaxed the fire higher, her hands clumsy but determined. The storm began to swell again, the wind gathering strength as though the land itself braced for what was to come. The sheriff arrived before dusk, his form cutting through the snow like a wound. He came alone this time, rage burning in his eyes, his arm bound where Talon's knife had bitten. His revolver gleamed in his good hand, raised without hesitation. "You think you've won?" He spat, his voice hoarse. "You think you can take what's mine?" Amara stepped forward before Talon could move, her breath white in the storm. Her heart hammered, but her voice rose strong. "I am not yours. I never was." The sheriff's face twisted. He raised the gun at her chest. For a heartbeat the world froze. The fires crackle, the winds howl, even the fall of snow seemed to halt. Then Talon moved, swift as the storm itself. He lunged between them, the arrow loosed in the same breath. The sheriff staggered back, the revolver firing wildly into the air, then fell to his knees. The fury drained from his eyes, replaced by disbelief, then emptiness. The snow drank his blood, covering it quickly, as if eager to erase his cruelty. Silence followed, broken only by Amara's ragged breath. Her knees weakened, but she did not collapse. She looked at the man who had tried to own her, and felt not triumph but release. His power had been smoke, his authority a lie. With his fall, so too fell the weight of all the whispers, all the judgment she had carried. Talon lowered his bow, his chest rising and falling, then turned to her. Snow clung to his hair, to the lines of his shoulders, but his eyes were steady, asking nothing, demanding nothing. She crossed the space between them, her hand trembling as she reached for his arm. He let her, his warmth grounding her in the storm's fury. "I thought I was nothing," she whispered, voice breaking. "But you showed me." Her throat closed, the words spilling into silence. He placed his hand gently over hers, a quiet answer, and that was enough. The storm howled louder, wrapping the world in white, but inside the circle of firelight and their shared breath, Amara felt something deeper than survival take root. Not belonging to a town, nor to a man, but to herself. She had chosen. She had spoken. She had stood. Night fell heavy, but the fire burned bright. Together they built a shelter against the wind, their movements unspoken but aligned, as if they had known each other longer than a few days. When at last they sat close, the fire casting shadows on stone, she leaned her head against his shoulder. He did not pull her closer, nor push her away. He simply remained, steady as the mountains, warm as the flame. The sheriff would never return. The town's whispers would drift like smoke, carried by wind until they faded. But here in the wilderness, she had found something greater than approval. She had found dignity. She had found a home beyond judgment. Her eyes closed, her body weary but her spirit alive. Before sleep claimed her, she felt his hand adjust the fur around her shoulders, careful as always, as though he guarded not only her life but her worth. The gesture said what words could not, that she was safe, that she was seen. And in that fragile, steady silence, Amara realized the truth that would guide her through every storm yet to come. That love, the kind that heals, is not shouted or seized. It is given in quiet acts, in steadfast presence, in the grace of simply staying.